Black light symbols burn when I record for Watts, and every black like Troy Davis who never had a fair shot.
Welcome to Left to Black. I'm your host, Mark Anthony Neal. We're here on location in Durham, North Carolina with Professor Margo Natalie Crawford.
It's good to be here.
Associate Professor of English at Cornell University, the author of Dilution, Anxiety, and the Black Phallus, Ohio State University Press, 2008, and also the co-editor with Lisa Gale Collins of New Thoughts on the Black Arts Movement, 2006. How are you doing?
I'm good.
So glad to have you on the show.
Good to be here.
So, given your work and your interest in kind of the archive of the Black Arts Movement, right? And so we're seeing this flourishing of Black activism, Black music, Black art, through Black Lives Matter. Are you seeing ways in which Black Lives Matter is in conversation with the Black Power movement or the Black Arts movement?
I think it is, and it's been on my mind because I'm actually really moved by the way that red, black, and green is being used in some of those Black Lives Matter rallies. So it's the red, black, and green, it's the Black Power fist that then makes me wonder in terms of gesture, right? If hands up, right? It's actually something that we may want to really think about as being tied to the way that some people also in those same rallies are using the Black Power fist, right? So when we think about the Black Power movement and the Black Arts movement in terms of the substance of style, I think that's really what we need to hold on to. The Black Arts movement, Black Power movement taught us, right, that style has substance. So why now, right, are people still using the red, black, and green, wearing the red, black, and green, using the Black Power fist in these rallies? I think it's because we're realizing, right, that the substance of that style may really be the sense that it's not just what you're saying in the signs that you're carrying, but also this sense that there's a certain solidarity building that happens, right, through the dissemination of these certain signs that really become, ways of holding on to these transnational Black freedom struggles, the sense that sometimes we're saying so much just by continuing to use these same signs.
I mean, talk about that a little deeper, because, when we think about the classic Black Panther look, with the sunglasses and the leather jackets and the berets, even in the civil rights movement, right, the way folks romanticize about an activist with some overall on, there are folks who will go, even inside these movements that, that's just fashion, right? Fashion is not important. What is it about Black mobilization around issues, around Black organization, about Black politics that makes style such a prominent part of what this is? Right? In some ways, like if to the extent that if there's no style, folks aren't really interested in the movement.
Right. No, I think that's so true. And so I'm wondering, let's think about the Black Power fist, for example. Sometimes in some of those photographs of the Black Lives Matter rallies, when we see that Black Power fist, what is, let me say it again, what is the substance of that style? Like you're asking, why then, right, might that really matter, right? That right then, when that fist is being used in that Black Lives Matter rally, what is being signaled there? And I think it really may be helpful to then really lean into the difference between those very words, Black Lives Matter, as opposed to Black Power, right? Because Black lives don't simply matter. Of course, we know that when the most progressive parts of the Black Lives Matter rally, when they're using that language, they don't want us to hear that word matter and think that we somehow have moved from Black self-determination, Black power to simply, well, we matter. We have a right to live. And so I'm wondering, in terms of the substance of the style, when we see people holding on to not just hands up, but the Black Power fist, I'm wondering if unconsciously or consciously, that's a way that people are insisting that no, what we want is not just the right to live, that we actually need that self-determination, we need that Black power.
When you think about the number of youth who are involved in Black Lives Matter, right? And this is really, for a lot of young folks, their first opportunity to really be engaged, right? When we saw the gathering in Cleveland, recently of the movement for Black Lives, right? And one of my colleagues, Bakari Kitwana, mentioned that, for a lot of these young folks who had been organized around social media, this was the first time they had come together in any kind of national gathering, right? Where they could touch people and kind of engage in the spirit. But it also raises a question that when we see the references to red, black, and green, the references to Black Power Fist, the references to that era, do they have a full understanding of the context that produced those moments? We always are worried about, we often talk about, white cultural appropriation of Blackness, but there are a lot of ways in which young Black folks themselves are appropriating the signs and the symbols of previous Black, movements, and movement moments, right? Without necessarily having a full understanding of what it is they're appropriating.
And this is crucial. This is why I think it's so important that we realize that right now there's a steady flattening of the Black Power movement and the Black arts movement. And so we need to educate people, and especially younger people, about the nuances, the complexities of the Black Power movement and the Black arts movement. Because if they are then appropriating some of these very signs, some of these very elements of style, if they're appropriating that without realizing how the movements were actually mobilizing those very signs, then of course we're in trouble, because they're not realizing, when we think about the greater education that has to happen, they're not realizing, for example, that the Black Power movement, right, that the Black Power movement really was anticipating so much of what we now see as even, the more complicated, nuanced parts of post-Black. And once again, as you know, of course, we don't mean post-race, but post-Black, this sense that there's an opening up of Blackness so that Blackness doesn't have to be limiting in any way. Well, the Black Power movement and the Black arts movement fully also included that move. It's why in my most recent work, the manuscript I've finished recently, I call it Black Post-Blackness. Because I think the Black Post-Blackness, it doesn't only emerge right now, right, late 90s and then early 21st century, as we move to the post-Black. Black post-Blackness is a really intriguing part of the Black Power movement and the Black arts movement. In the 1960s and 70s, these very movements, they were actually constantly complicating Blackness. So it almost becomes this counterintuitive Black post-Blackness, right? When we think about then Haki Madhubuti in one of those canonical, classic signature Black arts movement poems, Gwendolyn Brooks, when he actually then refers to unsubstanced Black after that long litany, right? Into the 60s, a word was born, Black, 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 Black. And then he finishes that full riff with that very phrase, unsubstanced Black. We then see one of these core examples of how the Black arts movement is actually moving, right, to that, what I really think of as Black aesthetics unbound. Right, so clearly the way that they were very often in the Black arts movement wanting to crystallize, right, Black aesthetics in this sense that we want to have our own criteria, right, for analyzing our art and our cultural production. So clearly this sense that we want to really decenter that outside gaze, that white gaze, that dominant gaze. So we do want to claim, right, that this is how we understand Black aesthetics, but there's also this constant emphasis on Black aesthetics needing to be unbound. And so I think that's what right now we need to make sure that younger people understand about the Black arts movement and the Black Power movement, right? That these movements were much more complicated, much more nuanced than we see when we sometimes have Black nationalism being really repudiated. This sense that even thinking about some ways in which what's consciously and unconsciously happening is this sense that African American literature, African American visual art is able to do something that's much more profound and abstract and experimental after we let go of the Black arts movement investment in what Darby English calls Black representational space. Right. But what I'm arguing is that the Black arts movement is invested in Black representational space, and the very movement is also really constantly complicating that space.
You're watching Left of Black. I'm your host, Mark Anthony Neal. We're here on location in Durham, North Carolina. We're joined by Margo Natalie Crawford.
Remember the middle name.
The middle name. Associate Professor of English at Cornell University. A couple of things that I've been thinking about around all of this. It's the 50th anniversary of Watts.
Yes.
And trying to make these connections from Watts to Rodney King in 1992 to Ferguson, Baltimore, Charleston, et cetera. That's one piece of it. And then thinking about that LA region again and the emergence of Kendrick Lamar.
Yes, yes.
And everybody is wondering, these movements are going on. It's like, where's the music to the movement, right? And it's unfair because we simply think that somehow Curtis Mayfield or Aretha Franklin were writing songs to the movement as opposed to them being inspired by everything that was going on and just creating what was in their heart. But Kendrick creates a song like All Right, which is now emerging as kind of the anthem of the Black Lives Matter movement.
Right.
And he's not thinking about anything when he's creating that song, right? He's just saying something heartfelt. But talk about how important,
right.
When you talk about stylistically, right? The visual
Right.
style and being able to find
Right.
nice little pithy sayings that folks can repeat, Black and I'm proud. How
Right.
important is music to this?
I think it's crucial. I think it's, I remember when, and to me, it's fascinating to think about these very interviews. When I started interviewing some of the Black arts writers, in particular some of the poets, when I heard in multiple interviews this idea that all of the poets, it almost had this shape. All the poets were wannabe jazz musicians. What they really wanted to do, right? Right. And so when we think about this notion of the movement having certain soundtracks, I think that Kendrick Lamar is fascinating, right? Because I think hip hop, when we go back to how the substance of style of the Black arts movement, how it lingers, I think when hip hop clings and holds on to Black power or Black arts movement style, right? Gestures, just the larger flow. I think it's fascinating. It makes me think then that hip hop really having a certain way of understanding that the Black arts movement, when you really think about when Trisha Rose refers to the flow, layering, and rupture, right? That's hip hop. That's hip hop aesthetics at large, right? I think some of the hip hop artists, what they really show is that the Black arts movement also, going back to Black aesthetics, Unbound, that the Black arts movement had that flow, had that layering, had that rupture. So when I use this term Black post-Blackness as a way of understanding the Black arts movement and some of what's happening with Black aesthetics right now, both with the literature and the visual art and the music, I think that we really are, we're thinking about that flow, layering, and rupture, that becomes a way to connect the 1960s and 70s and our 21st century moment.
Talk a little bit about this new project, because it sounds fascinating.
Yeah, so it's, the full title is Black Post-Blackness, the Black Arts Movement and 21st Century Black Aesthetics. And each chapter I put the Black Arts Movement in conversation with 21st century literature or 21st century Black visual culture. And what I'm really trying to do in chapters like the chapter that's entitled The Politics of Abstraction is to uncover, right, these aspects of the Black arts movement that have really been misread.
Right.
I mean, think about abstraction. We don't think that abstraction played a certain role in the Black arts movement.
Baraka is functioning as an avant-garde artist.
Yes.
I mean, folks miss that particular part of it, right? Right.
And so I look at, with Afro-Cobra, even some of the very interviews I did with some of the artists, I look at how then when they're using abstraction, it's for a purpose.
Right.
Hence my title, The Politics of Abstraction, right? And so I really lean into the way that Afro-Cobra and some of the writers, they're then using abstraction in a way that takes us to what Afro-Cobra, as one of their tenets, Mark, called mimesis at midpoint. This sense that they were thinking so deeply about abstraction in relation to the, quote, representational, that they were actually using a phrase like this notion that it's a balancing act. Right. Mimesis at midpoint. In one of the catalogs, they describe mimesis at midpoint as being this sense that there's some kind of midpoint between absolute representation and absolute abstraction. But Nelson Stevens, in one of the interviews I did with him, and Nelson Stevens is such a wonderful example, right, of this, of what I call the politics of abstraction. in one interview, he explained to me that it was always that risk of, quote, going too far. And what he meant, if that painting, right, that you're doing, if it simply becomes abstraction for abstraction's sake, that's not what they were intending, that they wanted to actually show that there's such a thing as Black abstraction.
And this is what you see in the Arts Ensemble in Chicago.
Absolutely.
And so many other, right?
Yes. And so in the book, in Black Post-Blackness, I have a chapter on anticipation as I think about the Harlem Renaissance, going back to the sense that what I'm really doing is trying to trouble a certain way that we periodize some of these movements.
Yeah.
So the more militant parts of the Harlem Renaissance also really lean into some of the energy of the Black arts movement. So with that chapter, I really look at Marita Bonner, for example, and her play Purple Flower, that we could easily read as a Black arts movement play, and not only because she refers to the devils, right? White devils, right? But this sense that we need to think about the very aesthetic of anticipation, right, as a way then to understand Black aesthetics. So yes, I have a chapter
on... So
what's
being anticipated now?
I love it. Okay, that is such, I think, an important question. I think it takes us in a beautiful way back to where we started in terms of our very focus on Black Lives Matter, right? Because when we think about what's being anticipated, right? This sense that this next step that we want to even begin to hail, right? I think, for me at least, it takes us back to the notion of movement, right? Black Lives Matter, if this is going to remain a movement, I think we then need to lean even more on the Black Power movement, on the Black arts movement, to understand, right, that movements really build, this sense that it's not then even going to be possible for us to pin it down and say, okay, this is what the Black Lives Matter movement will become, but hopefully it will continue to evolve. Hopefully, we will see that there's a way in which young people are realizing, right, that movements are then not, what happened in the 1960s and 70s, but movements rather being something that young people, right, can build right now. Yeah.
We've been joined today by Professor Margo Natalie Crawford, Associate Professor of English at Cornell University. Thanks for joining us.
It's been a pleasure. Thank you, Mark.
Black lights and booze burn when I record for Watts, and every black like Troy Davis who never had a fair shot. All black, everything black, culture over everything.